It started with a single letter slipped under my door. No name, no return address, just bold red ink that read, "You're in violation." The strange part? My house wasn't even part of their HOA within days. Neighbors I'd never met began glaring, whispering, and snapping photos of my lawn like I was some kind of criminal. Then came the knock, 3 sharp bangs, and a woman's voice screaming through the door. "We'll seize you by force if we have to." I thought it was a joke, until I realized how far this HOA was willing to go to control what didn't belong to them. What happens when power and obsession collide just beyond your own fence line? When I first moved into Oak Ridge Meadows, it felt like the perfect escape. Quiet streets lined with maple trees, neighbors who waved politely, and the comforting hum of sprinklers at sunset. I'd saved for years to buy that little 2-story home just outside the HOA boundary. The realtor even made it a selling point. You'll get the peace and quiet without the politics. And for a while, it was true. I painted my shutters blue, planted wildflowers along the walkway, and watched the world settle into a rhythm that finally felt like mine. Every weekend, I'd see the HOA folks across the street holding their meetings in matching polos, clipboards in hand, patrolling lawns like a suburban security force. I never paid much attention. After all, their rules didn't apply to me. Or so I thought. Then, little things started happening. A note tucked under my windshield, reminding me that community standards matter. A neighbor mentioning that my garden was a bit colorful for Oak Ridge. The friendly waves grew stiffer. Conversations ended when I walked by. It was as if the invisible line separating the HOA homes from mine had suddenly turned into a fence I wasn't supposed to cross. Still, I brushed it off. People had their quirks. Maybe they just didn't like newcomers. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it until the first official-looking letter arrived, accusing me of violating landscaping codes I wasn't even subject to. That was the moment I realized something strange was brewing in Oak Ridge Meadows. Something that had nothing to do with grass height or paint colors, and everything to do with control. At first, I tried to laugh it off. How could an HOA possibly have authority over a property outside its borders? It seemed ridiculous, a clerical mix-up maybe, or some overzealous board member trying to flex. But the laughter faded the morning I woke up to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. Final warning, compliance required. The letter accused me of violating multiple community codes, everything from my mailbox color to my driveway's surface texture. My driveway, a property they didn't own, didn't maintain, and had no jurisdiction over. I called the number listed at the bottom, expecting an apology or at least an explanation. Instead, a clipped voice on the other end simply said, "All homeowners within the Oak Ridge perimeter are expected to uphold neighborhood standards." Then the line went dead. Within a week, the letters multiplied. Some were official-looking, stamped and signed by the HOA president, a woman named Karen Lawton. Others handwritten in looping, aggressive cursive. They all said the same thing: fix your violations or face consequences. At first, I tried to reason with them. I wrote back, politely explaining that my home wasn't registered under their association. I even included a copy of my property deed. Days later, I found my trash can tipped over, my garden trampled, and a note jammed under the lid. "You think you're above the rules?" That was the moment it stopped being annoying and started feeling threatening. Neighbors I'd once exchanged small talk with suddenly looked through me like I wasn't there. Karen began making unannounced visits, pacing at the edge of my yard, jotting notes on her clipboard, shaking her head with theatrical disapproval. One morning, I caught her photographing my house. When I stepped outside, she didn't flinch. She just said, "You'll regret making this difficult," then turned and walked away by the second month. I'd received 3 fine notices, totaling more than $2,000 for alleged violations of HOA landscaping, and paint policies. They weren't legally binding, of course, but the constant harassment made life unbearable. The letters came daily now. Each one was angrier, more demanding. Then came the community meeting. A printed invitation arrived in my mailbox, an address inside the HOA clubhouse. It's the same building I was told I had no access to. The note read, "Attendance mandatory." I almost didn't go. But curiosity, or maybe defiance, got the better of me when I arrived. Every chair faced a long table at the front where Karen sat, flanked by her board members. The chatter stopped when I entered. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. "Mr. Hale," she said sweetly, "we're here to discuss your repeated noncompliance." I reminded her calmly that I wasn't part of the HOA. Her expression hardened. "You are within the community perimeter," she replied. "Whether you've signed our documents or not, your property affects the integrity of Oak Ridge." The words sounded rehearsed, legalistic, but hollow. I stood there, surrounded by neighbors nodding in agreement, realizing just how deep her influence ran. The meeting turned into a public shaming. She listed my so-called violations, the flower colors, my mailbox design, even the height of my front hedge. People I barely knew murmured their disapproval. I left feeling like I'd been tried and convicted by a jury of strangers. Days later, my car tires were slashed. No note this time. No witness. Just silence. I filed a police report, but without proof, it went nowhere. The officer's tone was sympathetic but distant, like he'd seen this kind of Suburban madness before and knew it rarely ended cleanly. Karen escalated next. I received a certified letter claiming the HOA would be taking corrective action if I failed to comply within 7 days. When I called my attorney, he nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. "They have no legal claim," he said. "They're bluffing." Still, part of me couldn't shake the feeling that, bluff or not, Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted being told no. A few days later, while mowing my lawn, I noticed 2 HOA board members standing across the street, filming me. When I approached them, they stepped back and said, "We're documenting violations." Then they left, smirking. That night, someone rang my doorbell at 11 p.m. when I looked through the peephole. There was no one there, only a folded piece of paper taped to the glass. Final notice, property seizure pending. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, lights off, watching the empty street under the soft glow of the street lamps. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every car that slowed near my house made my heart pound. Then, as if the intimidation wasn't enough, Karen started targeting my mail. Packages went missing. Utility bills arrived already opened. A friend from down the street warned me quietly that Karen had been going door to door, telling neighbors I was disruptive and under investigation. I considered moving, packing up, and walking away from all of it. But something in me refused. This was my home, my land. I wasn't about to let a group of self-appointed rule enforcers dictate where I could live or how I could exist. So, started keeping records, photos, videos, copies of every letter, every note, every sign of their harassment. I even installed a camera near the mailbox. One morning, that camera caught her, Karen herself, prying open my mailbox and slipping something inside. When I pulled the note out, my hands trembled. It wasn't typed. It wasn't even signed. It was scrawled in thick, angry pen strokes. "We'll seize you by force if we have to." That was the day I realized it had gone too far. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about control and the illusion of power she refused to lose. As I stood there, holding that letter, something inside me shifted. Fear turned into resolve. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to fight back. And the next move I made would change everything. Top of form, bottom of form, the morning of the hearing felt unreal. After months of harassment, legal notices, and sleepless nights, it all came down to this: a formal HOA tribunal that wasn't even supposed to include me. Yet there I was, standing in front of their boardroom table under fluorescent lights. The word non-compliant printed in bold across the documents spread before me. Karen sat dead center, her manicured nails tapping the tabletop like a ticking clock. Around her, the other board members watched with the blank obedience of people too scared or too loyal to question her. She began the meeting with a tone of triumph, reciting a list of alleged violations, each one more absurd than the last. "Your property diminishes the visual integrity of Oak Ridge," she declared, flipping through her binder like a prosecutor building a case. "Your mailbox, your garden, your color scheme, all of it stands in violation of our standards." I reminded her again that my house wasn't within their jurisdiction. She smiled, a slow, smug smile that made my stomach turn. "We've updated our charter," she said. "The boundaries now extend to include your lot. It's retroactive." The room went silent. Even the board members shifted uneasily in their seats. It was a stunning declaration, an illegal one, but delivered with the confidence of someone who believed no one would dare challenge her. I could have shouted, argued, stormed out. But instead, I opened my briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside were the documents my attorney and I had been preparing for weeks: photos of Karen trespassing on my property, video stills of her opening my mailbox, timestamps, certified mail receipts, every threat she'd ever delivered. "Here's the thing, Karen," I said evenly. "You didn't extend your boundaries. You crossed mine." Her expression faltered. I continued, my voice steady but cold. "What you've been doing isn't enforcement. It's harassment, intimidation, and in several cases, a felony." I pointed to a still photo of her at my mailbox. "Tampering with federal property carries up to 5 years in prison. And that letter you left? That's a written threat of violence." So before we talk about lawn colors, we might want to talk about the law. The silence that followed was electric. One of the board members coughed. Another pushed her chair back slightly, eyes flicking nervously toward Karen. Karen tried to regain her footing. "You're bluffing," she said. "No one will take you seriously." That's when I pulled out the final document, a court summons. My attorney had filed for a restraining order, citing harassment and attempted coercion. "Actually," I said, "they already have." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked under the strain. "You can't do this. This community is mine to protect." And there it was, the truth, raw and exposed. This was never about rules or aesthetics. It was about control. Karen had built her identity around being the enforcer, the queen of a tiny suburban kingdom. The idea that someone lived outside her reach was something she couldn't stand. She stood abruptly, pointing a trembling finger across the table. "You think you've won? You're just an outsider. We'll make sure you regret this." But before she could continue, my man at the end of the table, one of the quieter board members, spoke up for the first time. "Karen," he said softly, "he has evidence. We can't be part of this." Her head snapped toward him, disbelief flashing across her face. But the others were already avoiding her gaze. The control she'd held for years, the fear she'd cultivated. It all began to crumble in real time. I didn't need to say anything else. I gathered my papers and walked out, leaving her in that sterile room, surrounded by the silence of people who had finally stopped clapping by the time I reached my car. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from release. For the first time in months, felt like I could breathe. But that sense of calm didn't last long. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of an engine idling outside. When I looked through the blinds, I saw headlights pointed directly at my house. Then the horn blared, one long, unbroken sound that echoed through the cul-de-sac. I stepped onto the porch, phone in hand, recording. The car door slammed. Karen stood there, illuminated by the beam of her own headlights, her hair wild, her voice cutting through the night. "You think you can ruin me?" she screamed. "You think you can make me look like a fool?" I said nothing. Just kept the camera steady. She took a step forward, then another. "I built this community," she shouted. "You don't belong here." Neighbors' lights began flicking on, doors opening. People emerged, watching from porches and driveways. The same people who'd once nodded along with her every decree now stood in silence as her meltdown unfolded under the yellow streetlights. I could hear whispers ripple through the crowd. "She's lost it. Is she drunk? What is she doing?" Finally, one of the neighbors called out, "Karen, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." Oh, she froze. The words hit her harder than anything I could have said. She looked around, realizing every eye was on her. The board members, the residents, the people she'd spent years trying to control. Her voice broke. "I was just trying to keep things perfect," she murmured, but it was too late. Within minutes, police arrived. The same officer who dismissed my earlier reports stepped between us, this time treating her like the problem she was. She tried to explain, gesturing wildly toward my house, but the words didn't matter anymore. Her reign had ended, not with a legal order or a formal vote, but in a single moment of public collapse. As they escorted her to the car, I caught her eye one last time. There was no fury left, no superiority, just disbelief. The kind of look people give when the world they built starts to dissolve beneath them, when the patrol car pulled away. I stood alone on the porch, the night strangely quiet again. The neighbors lingered for a while, murmuring among themselves, unsure of what to say. Some nodded at me, small gestures of apology or solidarity before retreating to their homes, for the first time since moving in. The street felt still. I turned back toward my front door. Cameras still in hand, the red light blinking softly. I didn't know yet how the legal process would play out, or what fallout would follow. But one thing was certain, the balance of power in Oak Ridge had just shifted, and for Karen. There would be no coming back from that, still, as I closed the door behind me. One thought lingered. If a single person's obsession could tear apart an entire neighborhood, what would it take to make sure something like this never happened again? Top of form, bottom of form, the days after that night felt surreal. Like the neighborhood had collectively exhaled for the first time in years. Oak Ridge Meadows, once defined by pristine lawns and whispered gossip, suddenly felt quiet. Peaceful, even. The patrols stopped. The flyers disappeared. The HOA hotline, once buzzing with reports and complaints, went silent. Karen's breakdown spread quickly. By morning, the entire community had seen the footage, not just my recording, but half a dozen videos from other residents who'd captured it on their phones. Within 48 hours, the board released a formal statement announcing her temporary leave of absence. Everyone knew it wasn't temporary. She was done. But peace doesn't return overnight. For weeks, the tension lingered in the air like static. People avoided eye contact at the mailboxes, unsure which side they'd been on. The ones who'd supported her most loudly were suddenly nowhere to be found. The same neighbors who'd scowled at me now waved awkwardly, as if hoping politeness could erase everything that had happened. My attorney advised me to press charges, and part of me wanted to. After all, I had the evidence, the mailbox tampering, the threats, the harassment. But another part of me just wanted it to end. I didn't want to spend another second of my life tangled in her obsession. Still, the law had to do its part. Karen was charged with misdemeanor harassment, trespassing, and tampering with federal property. She pleaded down most of it, but the restraining order stuck. She couldn't come within 500 feet of my home, or any HOA property for that matter. That detail was poetic. Meanwhile, the board scrambled to repair its image. Several members resigned quietly. Those who stayed promised transparency, reforms, and community healing. They held open meetings, invited feedback, even asked me, the outsider they'd once vilified, to attend as a guest speaker on property rights. I declined. I didn't want to become a symbol of their redemption arc. I just wanted to live. But living wasn't easy. My property had become a landmark, the house that broke the HOA. Curious locals drove by, slowing to stare or snap photos. Online forums picked up the story. Someone even uploaded the confrontation video to social media, where it went viral. Within days, headlines appeared on neighborhood blogs and HOA watchdog pages. HOA president loses it over non-member homeowner. The comments were a mix of outrage and fascination. People shared their own stories, tales of overreaching boards, ridiculous fines, and petty power trips. Reading them, I realized something unsettling. My story wasn't rare. It was just one of thousands playing out in quiet suburban streets across the country. Still, for all the attention, I stayed focused on rebuilding normalcy. I repainted the shutters, replaced the mailbox, and let the wildflowers bloom again. Every morning, I'd stand on the porch with a cup of coffee and just listen to the birds, to sprinklers, the wind moving through the trees. Simple sounds that had once been drowned out by anxiety. Then one morning, about a month after everything ended, I got a letter. No envelope, no return address. Just a single sheet folded twice. My stomach tightened. Old instincts, but when I opened it, the handwriting wasn't Karen's. It read, "Thank you for standing up." Some of us were too scared to. There was no signature. Just that one line. I didn't know who had written it. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone on the board. But it made something inside me loosen. For the first time, I understood that this hadn't just been about me versus her. It had been about fear, the kind of fear that thrives in silence. The kind that keeps people compliant because they're afraid to be next. In the months that followed, Oak Ridge changed. Slowly, but noticeably. The new board scrapped half the old rules. They stopped issuing fines for mailbox colors or unapproved plants. They actually encouraged homeowners to personalize their spaces again. Gardens started looking brighter. Lawns weren't perfect anymore, and somehow, that made the neighborhood feel more alive. As for Karen, no one saw her much after the incident. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her house quietly and moved away. Some said she'd gone to live with family out of state. Others claimed she was trying to start over in another HOA community under a different name. I didn't care enough to find out which was true. What mattered was that the shadow she'd cast over the community had finally lifted. People talked again. Real conversations, not just polite exchanges about hedge, height, or recycling bins. There was laughter at the mailbox's block parties in the cul-de-sac. Even a neighborhood barbecue where someone joked, "Guess we're all in violation now." That night, sitting under the string lights with neighbors who'd once avoided me, I realized how absurd it all had been. How easily people can surrender their freedom for the illusion of order. How power, once unchecked, can twist something as simple as a rulebook into a weapon. But it wasn't just about an HOA. It was about human nature, the craving for control, the fear of losing it, and the courage it takes to stand up when everyone else stays quiet. Sometimes, the battle isn't fought in courtrooms or protests. Sometimes it happens in driveways and mailboxes, between the people who believe they own you and the ones who refuse to be owned in the end. I didn't need to win in any official sense. The real victory was taking back my peace and showing everyone watching that silence isn't safety. It's surrender. Months later, when the wildflowers came back in bloom, I planted one more row along the edge of my lawn. Bright reds, yellows, and purples spilling into the curb, a living reminder that control only wins if you let it. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't shouting or suing or fighting. It's living exactly the way They told you not to, because peace isn't given by people like Karen, it's claimed. One small act of defiance at a time. So if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of your own property, wondering whether it's worth the fight, remember this: every fence they build, every rule they invent only holds power if you accept it. The moment you stop playing by their script, you've already won. And as I watched the sunset that evening, the neighborhood glowing gold and quiet again, I realized something else. Oak Ridge Meadows had finally become what I thought it was when I first moved in. A place where I could just be home, top of form, bottom of form.